Hi guys, it's Mark Zickery, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zickery of Space Command, and I'm wearing my independent t-shirt, my independent bookstore t-shirt that says, "Don't bother me, I'm reading." And that's particularly apt today because I'm going to be doing some fun stuff relating to the books that I acquired on my recent trip to England and Wales. Meantime, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi, ding the bell, make comments, like all that stuff, tell your friends. And if anyone knows how to utilize social media ads or other methods to increase viewership, I'm very interested in that, so definitely comment or email me at markzickery@gmail.com. A lot is going to be happening, and you could be part of it. We're going to be having a Christmas party at our studio, holiday party. It'll be on January 1st. Tim Russ will be entertaining. Christina Chong of Strange New Worlds may well be there. All of our investors and other friends and members of the table, and you could be part of it too if you want to be a part of expanding our reach to all the wonderful science fiction fans in the world. So reach out to me, markzickery@gmail.com, or just comment here, and that would be much appreciated because I hail from the past. I'm from the 20th century and do not know how to do these things you modern people know how to do. But I'm looking forward to a car that drives itself. I'm very tired of driving in Los Angeles, but nevertheless, let's get into the meat of this, the real reason we're here today. Now, many of you know that a few weeks ago, before this past weekend, by the way, we were shooting Elaine's feature, Voiceless Roar. It went great. Barbara Bain was on the set. Amazing, wonderful woman, and much more to come, We're shooting Space Command. We're shooting Voiceless Roar. We're going to be shooting the 5 pilots of the Showrunners Network. I talk about that in one of my recent videos. If you want to check it out, you can find out everything we're up to. But a few weeks ago, for 3 weeks, Elaine and I had mostly a vacation. We had a few business meetings with our development exec and with Christina Chong of Strange New Worlds, who's going to be coming into our world, and also Stephen Hopkins, who was director of Predator 2 and also directed the TV series 24. So, but other than that, those few little things, mainly it was a vacation. And something that I love to do on vacation is I love to go to bookstores and find books I've never seen before and buy them if I can afford them. And that's what we did with this trip. And we were in London for 2 weeks, week 1 and week 3, and for week 2 we were in the Welsh town of Hay-on-Wye, which is a bookstore town, which is really amazing, and I love it. I've been there many times, and each time it's totally great. So I'll go through some of these books I got on my UK trip, my book haul, and this may take 2 or 3 videos because there's a lot of books to talk about, but I will start. And in many cases, they're books I've never seen before, editions I've never seen before. So why don't we start with, and they're often published by British publishers like Gollancz and Penguin. So this is very cool. This is I Am Legend by the great Richard Matheson. Now, of course, Matheson was a friend of mine. He wrote many Twilight Zone episodes, and we were friends. He came to my Twilight Zone party. We got together for meals. We were always very friendly when we came across each other. And in fact, it's interesting because he wrote a Star Trek episode called "The Enemy Within," which is quite wonderful. And then near the end of his life, he told me that he had a dream. He had dreamed a Star Trek episode, a new Star Trek episode called "The Death of Captain Kirk." And I encouraged him to write it down, but he never did. And it's a shame because it would have been wonderful to have another Richard Matheson Star Trek story in the world. But beyond that, of course, Matheson was one of the great horror writers of all time, and I Am Legend is one of the most important horror novels ever written. I have the first edition of this signed by Matheson, but this edition is by Gollancz. And for those of you who don't know the I Am Legend, the basic premise is there's a disease that essentially turns everyone in the world into vampires, and the only person who's not changed is a scientist who's holed up in a house, barricaded in a house, and at night the vampires come out, and he's trying to find a cure for this, and it goes from there. It was made first as Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price in the 60s, then as The Omega Man in the 70s with the great Charlton Heston, and then with Will Smith. And one thing about Will Smith's version, which was entitled I Am Legend, if you ever get that Blu-ray or that DVD, look at the version that has the original director's cut. It has a completely different ending, one I much prefer, one that makes a lot more sense. And and it's you know, really fun. So the reason I got this this copy of I Am Legend, other than the fact that it has a really cool cover, as you can see, this wonderful 2-color cover, or 3-color if you include black, is it's also got an introduction that puts it in its historical context by a writer named Graham Slight, and also it has an afterword by Stephen King. And Stephen King, of course, lists Matheson as one of his main inspirations in becoming a writer and how he's written, because Matheson was sort of the first really modern horror writer who wasn't using the old tropes that Poe and Lovecraft and Bram Stoker were using. He was completely an original. And I mean, you can say Lovecraft was as well, and Poe certainly was, but the point was that he wasn't looking backward for the 19th century. He was writing in very modern settings with very modern characters. He also did Duel. His writing credits are astonishing. I mean, Twilight Zone episodes like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. This guy is a huge legend and a great guy. He was really funny, he had a great sense of humor, and left a body of work that is well worth checking out even now. So, I Am Legend. If you've never read it, it's available on audio as well as on physical books. So that's Matheson. Now there are many publishers in England that I've never heard of, but there are also authors I've never heard of. And I'm a big fan of 1950s into the early 60s science fiction. I love the book covers. I love the writers. The quality of... Usually they were writing in 2 basic arenas. One was dystopic, because it was the time of the Cold War, so they'd be writing about after the bomb stories, or stories where other things hit the earth and cause civilization to basically collapse, which is a very fun genre. And most science fiction writers had a crack at least one book of that. And then there was this optimistic, forward-looking science fiction, because we were in the early stages of the space race, and they examine a world in which we are actually traveling to the moon and Mars and the outer planets and jumping to the stars. So I find it a very engaging time. And in terms of the covers, I love the artistic aesthetic of the 1950s in science fiction. You know, Elon Musk has returned to that with Starship, which I love. There's other things we can say about Mr. Musk, but I will not right now. But whatever you think of him, but I love the silver pointy rockets, and I just love that aesthetic, and I've utilized it in Space Command extensively. So here's a paperback I got in England called The United Planets. Now, interestingly enough, of course, United Planets is what the governing body of Space Command has in its universe. And I just like this cover. It's by a writer I've never heard of, Victor Waddy, and it's a dramatic journey between planets. So pretty cool, and thousands upon thousands of large glowing discs were hurtling toward them and disappearing from each side of the screen. It was a fusillade of instant destruction toward which they were speeding. Well, it sounds pretty cool. And again, a cool, very cool cover. I always like covers that have like a human person. It's kind of science fictional garb, and then maybe a space scene behind them with a spaceship and a planet or whatever. So that's really cool. I don't know who the artist was. Now, also another thing I found at a bookstore in Hanoi were these early science fiction magazines from the 50s of Galaxy, If, etc. Now, for those who don't know about the history of science fiction magazines essentially debuted in the 1920s with Hugo Gernsback, who did Amazing Stories, and then you got Astounding, which debuted in the 30s, and they really hit their heyday in the 50s. And there were several different flavors of science fiction that were represented by these magazines. So Astounding, which later became Analog, was edited by John W. Campbell, who the author of the classic story Who Goes There, which was made into the various movies of The Thing. And it's a wonderful piece of writing. If you've never read it, I recommend it. But then he became an editor, and he was one of the most influential editors in science fiction. He liked very rational science fiction, not the kind of melodramatic kind that had been published before him. And so he was looking for writers who could write with scientific accuracy, or at least their projections were accurate as far as they knew. And so Heinlein was one of his great discoveries. And so many writers who were sort of the hard science fiction writers wrote for Astounding, and then that became Analog, and Kelly Freas was one of his great cover artists. I like a lot of that stuff. The Dune stories were published initially in analog, and so forth. But then there was another magazine called Galaxy, and that was edited by H.L. Gold, Horace Gold, and it was much more sociological, much. I was going to say softer. It was the science fiction writers who might have whimsy or who might have some. They weren't the hard science guys. They weren't engineers generally. So you'd get people like Robert Sheckley, Theodore Sturgeon, Ray Bradbury would publish in Galaxy, etc. And it spun off a magazine called If that was very similar. And then the other branch was the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which was initially one of the editors was Anthony Boucher, a well-known mystery and science fiction author. And those would be the stories that were the more literary oriented or the more weird. Carol Emshwiller published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Often they'd be very outre kind of stories. Now many of these writers were publishing in all three of these branches of science fiction, and so you might find a Heinlein stories serialized in Astounding, but maybe they'd have a Heinlein article or story in one of these others, etc. Or Bradbury, same thing. So. In one of these bookstores in Hay on Wye, I found these issues from the 50s of Galaxy and If, which, as I said, were companion magazines. In some cases, they're the American edition, and in some cases, they're a British edition. And the main change with the British edition is it's got pricing in shillings and pounds and so forth. But the covers are great. And again, they speak to that wonderful optimism. Generally, there's always a little bit of whimsicality. So, for instance, here's the July 1951 issue of Galaxy, and it was only £3 for me to buy it. And you can see some kids firing off fireworks on a rocket landing field. So that's pretty wonderful, pretty wonderful. And again, it'll have stories by all the science fiction writers I grew up reading and loving, and that's really, really neat. Here's another great cover from Worlds of If, and it's a similar theme, which is a military guy showing the rockets to a kid. And so you can see, very neat. And again, the idea would be these would be spaceships, not missiles. So even though it's the Cold War, this is not a pro-war story in all likelihood. And then as I talked about the whimsicality, and here's another really fun one of kids at Halloween and looking over a fence at them is an alien who's just emerged from a flying saucer. And again, you can see, very fun, very eye-catching. Many of these these covers were designed to get someone to buy the magazine. So you would have them be visible at a distance because they'd be on a newsstand, and some people would subscribe, but I think most people would be buying them on the newsstand. Here is number 79 issue of Galaxy magazine, 3 and 6. So this is the British edition, and it's got another wonderful, wonderful cover, which you can see it's a woman who's crashed, and she's sitting on an island, and she has put her spacesuit on a flag as sort of an SOS. And I think that's a really, really cool cover. It may be at Emshwiller, I would have to check. But here's the stories that are in this issue, among others. Condition of Employment by Clifford D. Simak, one of the great science fiction writers. The Troublemakers by George O. Smith, who was also well known at the time. The Lady Who Sailed the Soul by Cordwainer Smith, who I think his real name was Eric Linebarger, and he worked in the government in terms of interrogation techniques and so forth. A very studious fellow and really well loved by science fiction readers. And then there's an article called What's Only Money by Willy Ley. Willy Ley was a German scientist and wrote about space a good deal and rockets. And so, but this is just so evocative. Just this illustration is so evocative, and I just love it. I mean, just look at that. Really, really beautiful. So then there's this, which is If, Worlds of Science Fiction, December 1954. And this, again, has guys waving at sort of futuristic fighter jets going by. And Worlds of If, and listen to the stories in here. The Jungle by Charles Beaumont, which was later made into a really entertaining Twilight Zone episode. And then it has stories by Milton Lesser, Alfred Koppel, I don't know who that is, and Poul Anderson. And they also have a College Science Fiction Award, $1,000 award story by Andy Offutt. And the story is called And Gone Tomorrow, and Andy Offutt became a successful writer of that era. And here's another great cover, and this one I know is by Ed M. Schwiller. And again, let's just talk about the detail in this. It's June 1952, Galaxy Science Fiction. Again, you can see the price tag is £3. That's what I paid for it, which is pretty cool, considering this magazine is, what, 72 years old. And if you look at this wonderful cover by Ed M. Schwiller, it speculates a future pedicab, a futuristic pedicab on this futuristic roadway. And then behind it are these futuristic looking buildings and a couple of rocket ships, one landed and one flying. I mean, there's just so much cool detail in this thing. And, you know, I'd want to go there. I'd want to live in that city. And it says, A Huckster's Utopia of the Future, read Gravy Planet, which is in this very issue. So pretty cool. Here's the September 1960 issue of If, which has the story Kangaroo Court by Daniel F. Galloway. And this, it was, and again, it's an artist doing a painting of Mars without what I suppose is a Martian pointing at it and correcting him about it. So again, pretty fun cover. And so, you know, so these, you know, so if you've never read any of these magazines, I would encourage you to do so. They're filled with fun stories. These are writers who were appearing in many of these magazines. Sometimes they'd have to write under pseudonyms because they would have 2 or 3 or 4 stories in one issue. So Robert Heinlein might be writing under the pen name Anson MacDonald, and Robert Sheckley had his pen names, and so forth. So you might be reading a magazine that might be entirely written by Robert Heinlein, but you wouldn't know it. And but I love all of this stuff. So let's continue on with the book haul. The book haul. So now I'd heard, this is an Ace science fiction special. It's an American paperback, but I got it in London. This is The Lincoln Hunters by Wilson Tucker. Interestingly enough, Wilson Tucker, at conventions, he'd go by the fan name of Bob Tucker, and I'm not quite sure why that is. I'm sure someone would know. But Ace Science Fiction, I think Terry Carr was the editor at the time. He published these novels that were like debut paperback novels, and many of them became classics of science fiction, books by Ursula K. Le Guin and many others. Now, the covers were all done by, at least the first run of them were all done by a husband and wife team, Leo and Diane Dillon, and ahead of their time in many, many ways. They were an interracial couple. He was black and she was white. And they collaborated on these illustrations, and they had this seamless style that merged together. You could never tell who was responsible for which illustration, but they drew together, and they were very well known as Harlan Ellison's great cover artists, and they also became children's book illustrators magnificently, and did record albums and so forth. And so this is one of their covers, and you can see Abraham Lincoln at the top and the bottom. I've heard very good things about this novel, though I've never read it, so I will be reading it, but very striking. And, oh, here's another Galaxy cover. I forgot this one. This is number 39, Galaxy Science Fiction, Let's Build an Extraterrestrial by Willy Ley. So that's an article in there. And you see them piecing one together, much as we have done on Space Command. Let's see what else was in here. Okay, this is very cool. I was talking about dystopic fiction. This is a British paperback, 4 square books, Not With a Bang by Chapman Pincher. Okay, and that's this cover with the time's running out in the hourglass with a man and a woman in there, and the base, and it says the Daily Express columnist gripping novel of the future, a drug to prolong life and restore youth. Suddenly and dramatically, the scientist's dream comes true. But from its discovery develops a world crisis. The population explosion causes widespread famine. Morals degenerate, increasing rates of suicide, divorce, and crime. The only solution lies in brutal restriction of population growth. Euthanasia is practiced on a large scale, and abortion becomes legal for all. Then a new menace presents itself. The drug has been forbidden. In the communist countries, will they now strike for global domination as the free world crumbles under the influence of the drug? Has the neurosis spread too far? And this is the author of the piece. It's always fun to see what these guys look like. And so I'll be checking that one out. It sounded pretty lurid and fun. And then this is a British edition of Fahrenheit 451, the great classic by my old friend Ray Bradbury. And what's fun about this copy, it's from, who published it? Corgi, that's a British publisher. Most of the books most of the covers of Fahrenheit 451. It's a very famous novel about book banning, and a fireman in that future burn books, and one of them starts reading the books, and it's a brilliant piece of work, and I highly recommend it if you've never read it. It was also made into a very good film by Francois Truffaut in the 60s, and I also recommend that. But usually the covers show the fireman like burning books or something relating to books, but one creature that's in the book but has not been done generally in the films that have been made of it is a mechanical hound who basically chases down the book readers, and it has a needle in its nose, and it basically knocks them out and so forth, brings them to justice, quote unquote. And so this cover has the mechanical hound, which is pretty interesting because you tend not to see that represented. And so I'd never seen this edition before, so I of course grabbed it. And another classic. Now here's a fun one. Now many of you have probably heard of Rosemary's Baby or the Stepford Wives. These are classics of their kind, particularly the movies that were made from the books. They were originally novels. They were novels by a guy named Ira Levin. And I believe his first book is this, which is called A Kiss Before Dying. And it's a great cover. It's a mystery novel, and it's really pretty, voted best first mystery of the year by someone. And it was made into a movie with Robert Wagner, and it was very, very striking. Joanna Woodward's in it too. And I think you can watch it on Canopy. And the basic plot is a guy, his girlfriend gets pregnant and he murders her. And then it's about him, trying to avoid being caught. And it's a good novel by, I think, and I think it is his first book, his first novel, the most extraordinary suspense thriller of the year. But again, this is a Signet book. It's an American copy, but again, I bought it in England. But I love the lurid covers that you get on mystery novels and science fiction novels. And I mean, that's, definitely, if I were in a Five and Dime or at a, ice cream counter and saw that on a spindle. They used to put these books on like little carousel, like little spinning racks, like comic books were sold back when I was a kid, and that's how you'd see them. So they had to be able to catch the eye from 20 feet away or more, and so that's why often they've got red and yellow on the cover, and they're very distinctive. So here's another book. This is Charles Eric Mayne. He was a writer. There are some three named writers, like Charles Eric Mayne, and he was well known for during this period, the 60s and 70s. And this is a book called The Darkest of Night. And it's got a pretty cool, slightly abstract cover of these two guys carrying a stretcher. And the basic premise is unknown virus mutation. Let's see what it says here. Unknown virus mutated by nuclear explosion strikes Britain. Stop. Medical science can't cope. Stop. Population being decimated. Stop. Civil war imminent. Stop. Disaster inevitable. Stop. The horror grows. Now, the reason it says stop all the way through this is because back in the day, you had telegrams, and you would dictate them, and rather than having periods, they would have stop, the word stop, at the end of a sentence. And so that's why, so everyone reading this would know that at the time. This was published by a British publisher called Panther. Apparently Charles Eric Mayne, because this book is set in England, Charles Eric Mayne is a British writer, though I'd heard of him back in the States. Now, also, here's another very cool thing. Many of you have heard of Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton was the great writer of Jurassic Park and The Andromeda Strain. He wrote and directed the movie Westworld, and also created ER. And sadly died too young, I think in his late 50s, early 60s. And a very super tall guy. I was once in an elevator with him. And but a really wonderful writer. Now, what wasn't generally known was that when he was in college as a med student, he wrote a series of mysteries under the pen name John Lang. And so this is one of them. Hard Case Crime is a recent publisher who has been publishing noir fiction, mystery fiction, both reprinting old titles and also publishing new ones, but very much with a 60s cover aesthetic. And so I bought this one. A million people would die unless he could enter the madman's mind. Wow, pretty good. Political radical John Wright is plotting an act of mass destruction, and federal agent John Graves has him under surveillance, trying to figure out what the plot is. When a government computer is hacked and a high-security shipment of nerve gas gets hijacked, Graves puts the pieces together, but can he stop Wright from unleashing his weapon before it kills 1 million people, including the President of the United States? And it's very interesting because that sounds like a quasi-science fiction plot, but it's sold as a mystery/thriller. So pretty fun. So then here's another great book, Man from Tomorrow, by Wilson Tucker. This is a Bantam book, 25 cents, is what they sold it for originally. I paid a little more than that. And it says, a man who could make us all obsolete. This astonishing novel tells of something which may be happening now. Wow. Pretty cool. Tomorrow is already here, it says on the back. Science fiction explores many possible tomorrows. It toys with time and space. Wowee. This is The Man from Tomorrow. Paul Breen is a mutant, a preview of the man of the future. In our world, his extrasensory powers are frightening, his talent wild and freakish. But even now, the Paul Breens may be moving among us, looking toward the day when our kind of man will be obsolete and they, the new ones, will inherit the earth. Okay? And there it is. Wow. Man from Tomorrow. With a very cool and striking cover. Many science fiction fans back in the day, they were almost, the vast majority were men, particularly young men, teenagers, people in their early 20s. And they often would feel like outcasts or weirdos. They would know that they were intelligent, but they would feel like they would often be very socially awkward. They would often feel like outsiders. They'd go to science fiction conventions to kind of hang out with people who had the same kind of tastes and interests and enthusiasms. And Asperger's, I think, is a very interesting thing to talk about relating to science fiction fans and writers, because lack of social skills but high intellect are symptoms that come with that form of autism. So, but anyway, I digress, as I tend to do. Now here we go. Here's another one. This one is not from the 50s or 60s, but actually from the 30s. This is Odd John. And again, you can see how great these covers are. Odd John by Olaf Stapleton. He was a British writer, and he wrote on a very galactic scale. He wrote about thousands or hundreds of thousands of years into the future and mutated humans. And this is the first edition from I think it's 35, and it was published in hardcover and paperback. And it's about an advanced form of mankind named John, Odd John. And it's one of the things that's very, very fun is many of these books, the bookstore has a little typed description of the book with the price. And so this is from Addyman Books, 39 Lion Street, Hay-on-Wye, also 27 Castle Street, Hay-on-Wye. And it says, here's what this little piece of paper says: Stapleton Olaf, Odd John, 4th issue of first edition, Methuen and Company Limited, London, 1935. Paperback, spine creased, 2-inch split between front panel and tail of spine, joints worn and rubbed, front cover creased, patch worn away from top of back cover and last 12 pages, end papers and edges foxed. Okay, and it's 20 pounds, which would be about 25 bucks. So this is a book that's almost 90 years old. Pretty good shape for a book that's almost 90 years old. And they have to describe this stuff in detail so that, particularly if you're buying it online, so you don't feel cheated when you get it. And you go, oh, this is creased. The funny part is I would go absolutely insane if I had to describe thousands of books and print out thousands of little pieces of paper and slip them in thousands or hundreds of thousands of books. I would go stark raving mad. And so thank God that is not my lot in life. So let's see what else we have here in my book box. So this is one of my favorite books, On the Beach by Neville Shute. Now, Neville Shute was an Australian writer, and he wrote many, many, many novels about aviation, about love stories set in World War II or thereafter. He was a wonderful writer, very solid, entertaining writer. And this book was very unusual for him. It's an after World War III story where Earth is essentially dying. And it's about an American submarine that appears in Australia, on the banks of Australia, and the crew members who meet and become involved with, particularly the captain, who becomes involved with an Australian woman, and it's how they face their imminent deaths. And it's a wonderfully written book, very solid, very realistic, And again, I highly recommend it if you've never read it. It was made into a wonderful movie directed by Stanley Kramer, starring the great Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner and Fred Astaire and Anthony Perkins, who would later play Norman Bates, or maybe he played Norman Bates before this, either way. But this book came out in 1957, and I love inscriptions in the front of a book. It says, "To Ham, from John and Betty, Christmas 1957." So the book came out in 57, and this is a first edition, and in dust jacket, as they say. And interestingly enough, it was Neville Shute's last book. He died not long after, and he'd been writing professionally since the 1920s, so he was an older guy when he wrote this, but he never got to see the movie that this was made into, which is a shame, because it's a very, very nice movie. It's also made into a TV miniseries, but it was not as good. I would recommend that you see the movie. It's fascinating how many, and also another interesting thing about this book is, every science fiction writer and many mainstream writers were, they were living under the threat of nuclear obliteration, and so they wrote novels about that. And whether they were marketed as mainstream or science fiction depended often on the writer, whether they were mainstream writers or science fiction writers. And Neville Shute was, of course, a mainstream writer, and so this was not at all packaged as science fiction. There's it was very much mainstream fiction, and it was a bestseller and did very, very well. Now, this is a book that I got for one very specific reason. Voyage to the Stars by Paul Bramwell, whom I've never heard of. This was published, let's see, who's the publisher on it? It's a British book published by Thomas Nelson and Sons Limited, 1968. Now, the thing I find fun about this cover, and I'll hold it up close, you may notice that he's wearing a spacesuit from 2001, which also came out in 1968, as this book did. And so it's like, well, okay. So the guy thought, well, bloody hell, I've got to paint an astronaut in a spacesuit looking at a monitor. How shall I do this? Oh, look, well, here's this movie that's just come out. I'll crib from that. Now, most artists do not steal that baldly from a movie or a TV show. I've seen it done sometimes, and I will point out more of those as we go. And here's the plot. A flying saucer, a dead alien to be buried. These are two of the surprises which await master rocket pilot Rip O'Leary when he arrives home from the Commonwealth Space Academy at Woomera, Australia. The flying saucer has crash-landed in the woods in the remote North Wales Valley, where Rip's father, Group Captain O'Leary, is carrying out research into the development of an ion drive for spaceships. Well, sounds pretty exciting. So, and I'll do maybe one or two more books, and then we can relax for the night and catch you up later on part 2 of this. But this is another book, an author I'd never heard of. This is the Master SF series, published by, who published it? I think Sphere, but I'm not sure. I'd have to, let me check. Hold on, guys. New English Library. And so it's a British paperback. It was a series of republished science fiction classics edited by Brian Aldiss and Harry Harrison. Brian Aldiss was one of the most famous British science fiction writers of that period, and Harry Harrison was an American who had transplanted to Ireland. And I actually met Harry Harrison, and he was a very entertaining guy. And he wrote the book Make Room, which was made into the wonderful Charlton Heston film Soylent Green. And again, if you've never seen the triad of great Charlton Heston science fiction movies, The Omega Man, Soylent Green, and of course Planet of the Apes, you have not lived a full life. So definitely check this out. But this book is Memoirs of a Spacewoman by Naomi Mitchison. And it has an introduction by Hilary Rubinstein. And on the back it says, sex and science fiction have usually made strange and clumsy bedfellows, but it's a very interesting way of saying it, but this remarkable novel explores with compassion and wit the infinite possibilities of erotic relationships between a human space traveler and the bizarre incumbents of the planets she visits. Memoirs is a delightful novel, too long overlooked, serious, and yet intensely entertaining. Wow. Alien sex, guys. So, so definitely worth checking out. Now, this book, again, I've never had a copy of this, and I've never read a book by this writer, Jane Gaskell. Strange Evil. And this is, again, English, an English book, Arrow Books Limited, London. And this is Strange Evil, Jane Gaskell's first controversial Atlan novel. It was a series of novels she wrote. It's a fantasy, the characters being engaged in a fierce war between good and evil. Okay, but here's the cool part. In the introduction, the publisher says, to publish a book by a child of 14, especially at a time when prodigies are in vogue, is a step which should cause any publisher to hesitate, not only on his own account, but in the interests of the child as well. It was thus only after very careful and searching consideration that we decided to publish Strange Evil. The manuscript, handwritten in 8 little blue exercise books, might well have passed over had not a preliminary glance suggested that it might have claims of its own, irrespective of the author's age. Several experienced readers confirmed this view, 2 of them commenting that it could be considered remarkable from any hand. Mr. Frank Swinnerton was much impressed by its, quote, originality and eloquence, unquote, by Jane Gaskell's power of sustained, confident invention, and by her use of symbolic contrast to illustrate her theme. We are publishing it, therefore, not because it is remarkable to have written a novel at all at 14, but because we think Strange Evil is, in itself, a strange, arresting, and beautiful book. So that's pretty cool, pretty fun. And she went on to a very long and successful career as a writer. So you can find her stuff on eBay. So finally, I'll end with this book. Many more to come as we visit this yet again. But this one I bought simply for the cover and the title. It is called The Man with Only One Head, and this is the cover. Okay, panic, panic, panic. And the basic plot is it's by Denzil Neve Barr, which is probably a pseudonym because it sounds extremely unlikely. And it's a Digit Book, another smaller publisher in England. And the time is tomorrow, and the world is struck by an unprecedented catastrophe, the fog. In complete darkness, the civilization struggles to survive. Then comes the light, and with it the realization of an even greater disaster. The whole of mankind is sterile, except for one man. Wow. Wow. Okay, which doesn't explain the title, but I suppose if I read this thing, I'll come to understand it. But anyway, so that's the book haul, part 1. And we'll have more parts to come. And I hope you've enjoyed me sharing these wonderful books with you. And, it's all of them have wonders within them. All of them have things that will surprise, things that will delight, and also things that will tell you that the 1950s and the 1960s were a time very different from now in many, many, many ways, but also in some ways very, very similar. And, what goes around comes around, and many of these writers who were talking about computers and spaceships and other worlds when there was very little in their world to prove that we would ultimately have what we have now. So that's it for now. Remember to subscribe, ding the bell. If you want to invest in Space Command or the Showrunners Network or both, please contact me at markzicree@gmail.com. You will be part of an amazing group of people, and you will get to come on set and meet our actors and come to our parties and have a wonderful time. So markzicree@gmail.com is the way to reach me, markzicree@gmail.com, and I will get back to you myself. It will not be one of my people, so it will be me. And that's it for now. Thank you so much. Life is wonderful, and it's because of the world I live in and the world that you share with me. So take care, and we'll talk soon. Bye, guys.